a network. So Education USA is a global network. We provide accurate, comprehensive, unbiased information about US higher education. And we have around 170, not 170 actually, 430 offices plus in different countries, over than 170 countries all over the world. So it's a global network, and we provide services related to advising and helping the students understand the US application process. And we do this for free since this is a US State Department grant. We have 2 offices in Egypt. One is in Du'i, the main one, and we have another one in Alexandria. The team in Egypt is myself, Yasmin Rouini, Education USA Senior Advisor, and my colleagues Hiba Abu Khalifa, she's based in Alexandria, and my colleague in Cairo, Walid Tarabulsi, he's also based in Cairo. So welcome everybody to this presentation. I'm gonna give the mic to Jacob and Katie, but I'm just going to let you know a brief introduction about who they are. So Katie is the Senior International Student Advisor and Sponsored Programs Manager at the University of Denver's International Student and Scholar Services Office. And we have also Jacob, and Jacob is Associate Director of International Student Admissions at the University of Denver. So both of them will be talking to you today about very, very critical topic, which is the CPT, Curriculum Practical Training, and the OPT, which is the optional practical training that is available to many students so they can have more hands-on experience to practice what they have studied at the US university they are attending. So more details to come with their presentation. Thank you so much, Jacob and Katie, and I'm sorry for this background noise. Thank you so much for accepting to be hosted with Education USA Egypt, and we're very excited to hear from you about this topic today.
Thank you so much. So, as was just said, my name is Jacob Wooden. I'm an Associate Director of International Student Admission here at DU, and I'm joined by my colleague, Katie, who is much more of an expert on the topic that we're talking about today. I'm very thankful that Katie agreed to do this with us and share her insights into this. I primarily work with undergraduate admission here at the University of Denver, but I can totally get you in contact with any graduate questions. So if over the course of this presentation you have more specific questions about DU, and we're happy to answer those as well, although we're also happy to answer any additional questions you may have about CPT and OPT in general. I'm going to begin by giving you a very brief introduction about the University of Denver, just so you kind of know where we are coming from and how that may impact kind of what we're talking about today. And then we'll get right into a lot of the details about CPT and OPT. So, the University of Denver, we are located in Denver, as you might expect from our name, and we are right south of the center of the city. Denver itself, if you're not familiar with it, is a city of about 3 million people. So it's a pretty big city by US standards. Not big in some other countries, but it's pretty big by US standards. But what makes Denver interesting is our proximity to the mountains. We're just 60 minutes up into the mountains, so it's a terrific location for hiking and skiing and snowboarding. Those may not be activities you do a whole lot in Egypt right now, but many of our students come to Denver for the job opportunities, come to Denver for the thriving city, and find that they really fall in love with the outdoors activities that you can do. It's bright and sunny here in Denver right now, and it is on most days because we have 300 days of sunshine a year, but it's generally pretty mild even when it's bright and sunny, and so it's a great place to live. It's very easy to get to downtown from our campus because you can get there in about a 12-minute light rail ride that you have free access to as a student. And that proximity to the city means there's a lot of internships, a lot of job opportunities, and that are ways that you can apply the CPT and OPT programs that we're talking about when you are here in Denver. We do have 100 different undergraduate majors to choose from and almost as many graduate programs. We're probably most strong in business, hospitality management, international relations, and engineering, and the STEM fields and the liberal arts. But we also have a really terrific law program for anyone that may be interested in that, or students who may be interested in social work or education. We have graduate programs in those. Our classes are taught by professors at both the undergraduate and graduate level, with 99.9% of them being taught exclusively by professors. And that means that you're going to be able to develop these relationships with the faculty while you are on campus that is very helpful for you as you're figuring out your academic career, but also figuring out your work career afterwards. 75% of our students complete at least one internship while they are on campus. And that's made possible because of our very active alumni and professional mentorship opportunities while they're here. I really like to focus when I'm talking about the University of Denver on all the learning and opportunities that can happen outside of the classroom. And as you'll see in a moment when we talk about CPT and OPT, that is one facet of this outside of the classroom learning you might be able to experience when you're on campus. 77% of our students at the undergraduate level do study abroad, which puts us in the top 4 in the United States. And they do that at no additional cost. So because of scholarships that we have available. So if you're an undergraduate student coming to study at Denver, you still have access to go study in a third country. So it's a very global education in that sense. But the same is true for a number of graduate programs that we have in that field as well. We have a number of special programs like the Pioneer Leadership Program at the undergraduate level, where you can really focus on leadership, including a minor in leadership while you are here. Our living and learning communities allow you to live and take classes along with people that share an interest. And we have so many student organizations to match your interests. Again, available to students at the undergraduate and graduate levels. So all sorts of ways for you to really get involved on campus and figure out what works for you as you kind of explore your academic and personal development while you're here. I'm going to drop a quick link in the chat before we launch right into the details of CPT and OPT. I'm trying to drop a link in the chat, but I'm having trouble finding the chat feature. So if you're interested in exploring more about the academic offerings here at the University of Denver, you can click on that link and see if we have a program that would appeal to you. And then with no further ado, we're going to get right into what we're here today. And I already saw a question in the chat asking this question. What is CPT and OPT? So curricular practical training and optional practical training are 2 forms of work authorization, work that you can do while you're in the United States while studying. And so it's one of the benefits of studying in the US is this opportunity to get real work experience. And they're 2 different programs, but they're closely related, which is why we're presenting on them together today. Curricular practical training, so verbatim is what's quoted here, the details of the regulation. An F1 student may be authorized by the DSO, so the authorized official at the school, to participate in curricular practical training program that is an integral part of an established curriculum. So CPT is defined to be alternative work/study, an internship, cooperative education, or any other type of required internship or practicum that is offered by sponsoring employers through cooperative agreements with the school. That's a lot of words. And what it really means is that CPT is a benefit for you if you're studying as an F1 student, if you meet certain eligibility requirements, and if your program of study asks you to complete a practical training that is closely tied to your academic degree. Katie will get into a lot more of the details about what we mean by that, but it basically means it's an opportunity for you to do a work program or an internship that is closely tied, closely related to your program of study while you're here. So what is optional practical training, OPT? This is another work benefit that's tied to F1 immigration status, but this allows you to complete 1 year of full-time employment or paid training in your major field of study. So this is a full-time work that you're doing that may happen when you are not taking classes right now. But there are different types of OPT that you can be aware of. There's pre-completion OPT, so full-time work that you are doing during your program of study or pre-graduation. There's post-completion OPT, which is the full-time work that you may be doing after you have studied. So you complete your academic degree and you can stay in the US for a period of time to to work while you were here without needing to get another work authorization. There's also a science, technology, engineering, and math extension to that. So if you complete a degree that is considered STEM eligible, so we have a list of degrees that meet that, you can actually apply for a 2-year additional extension of the OPT, which means you'll have up to 3 years to work in the United States after your degree program is done if you are in a STEM field. If you major in anything that's not STEM related or your degree is not connected to science, technology, engineering, or math, you'll have up to 1 year to work in the US without needing to get additional work authorization. So now that I've kind of introduced to you the concepts and what is CPT and OPT, I'm going to hand it over to Katie, who's going to talk about some of the rules for eligibility and also what you can do on CPT and OPT. Katie?
All right, thank you, Jacob, and thank you, Education USA, for inviting us. So as Jacob mentioned, I work in International Student and Scholar Services at the University of Denver, which we, by shorthand, call DU. And I have been at DU for about almost 1 year, but before that, I advised international students at American University in Washington, D.C. So I have experience not only with the way DU operates with their international students, but also another university. So when I'm talking about CPT in particular, I want you to keep in mind that CPT is policies can vary by university, so I'm going to try to make this as general as possible for you because you may be going, all of you on this call may be going to 50 some different universities in the US eventually, and those will have 50 different policies. Whereas OPT is a lot more straightforward at every institution. Every institution in the US has to follow the specific OPT regulations. CPT has a little bit more flexibility. So with that, I'll go ahead and start talking about CPT. So what CPT is you have to keep in mind the word curricular. It's called curricular practical training. So it means it has to be tied to the curriculum in some way. And so it's approved for a specific training provider in a specific time period. So that can be tied to a quarter, like at DU we're on the quarter system. It can be tied to a semester time frame for schools that are on the semester system. And it can be tied to a class that has an academic requirement that you complete some kind of training in an office, off campus, in a business, for a project. And this is because universities have different requirements for all students regarding real world experience, internships, practicums, things like that. So CPT is the way that the US government allows our office and the university to authorize international students on an F1 visa to take part in those activities. So universities have different requirements and policies to authorize CPT. So some universities only authorize CPT for paid experiences, for example. Other universities authorize both paid and unpaid experiences. There are some universities that only authorize CPT for a requirement for the degree, like let's say you have a required internship class, or a teaching practicum, for example, is a very common one, like when you're getting an education degree and you must do some teaching. That's something that would be authorized as CPT. And then other universities authorize CPT for both required and optional. And by optional, I mean something that is still in your field of study, because that is the government requirement that CPT must be in your major field of study. But optional meaning it might be an elective credit, or it might be an additional credit that you take, or an additional program that the university offers that you take part in. But again, that is something that each university's designated school officials, like myself, will explain to you once you're a student there and can ask specifically about how that university authorizes CPT. And so it's important to remember that CPT is authorized by the university's International Student Office. It's not authorized by the US government. So when you're an F1 student at a university, you receive an immigration document called an I-20. It means Immigration Form 20. We shorten it to I-20. And that is how a university authorizes students for various things. And so CPT comes, the CPT authorization is actually on your I-20 when we authorize it. You can go ahead, yep. So CPT does have time limits. It can be a part-time authorization or a full-time authorization, depending on how many hours you will be taking part in your internship or training. Part-time is 20 hours a week or less, and full-time is more than 20 hours a week. So that's a common point of confusion for many students that I have advised over the years, because the phrasing part-time and full-time means something very different to an employer. In the US, usually full-time means 35 to 40 hours a week benefited, meaning getting other benefits like retirement money, health insurance. Usually that's what's meant by full-time. Part-time is usually anything less than that. But for the F1 student, the government rule is that part-time is defined as 20 hours a week or less for CPT purposes, and full-time is more than 20 hours a week, okay? It's also very important that you keep in mind that if you do a full 12 months of CPT, so in other words, if you do 365 days or more of full-time CPT, you are not eligible to apply for OPT at that degree level. And a quick note about what we mean by degree level. Degree level in the United States starts at an associate's degree and then goes bachelor's, master's, doctoral. So it starts from the bottom and goes up. So at each level like that, you are allowed 12 months of OPT authorization if you choose to use it. But if you go over 12 months of full-time CPT at any one of those levels, you become ineligible for OPT. Because as I'll talk about later, OPT is 12 months of work authorization that you are allowed to have. So the rationale from the government's perspective is, if you already use 12 months of full-time practical training, why should you have another 12 months of full-time practical training? So there are two different types of programs. And it's very rare, I would say, that students do have a reason to use CPT that much. What is much more common is students doing several quarters or semesters of part-time CPT. Because remember, you're a student first, so you have to be attending your classes. And it's very difficult to take a full course load and work a full-time off-campus internship or training. So most students that do take internships that is authorized for CPT do so later on in their studies, especially a bachelor's student might not do CPT until their junior or senior year. And for a master's student, they might do CPT, the summer after their first year, for example. Okay, so we'll shift gears a little bit to OPT. So optional practical training, the employment must be related to the major as listed on that immigration form called the I-20. And that is typically the title of your degree you're pursuing. Master's in data science, for example, or bachelor's in biology. All students are eligible for 12 months of full-time OPT per degree level. And that degree level, again, is what I was explaining of the associates, bachelor's, master's, doctoral. And this science, technology, engineering, and math extension is an additional 2 years on top of the 1 standard year of OPT that's available. So like CPT, I said the university authorizes. For OPT, the university plays a large role in OPT, in you getting that authorization, because we, as the designated school officials, must recommend you for OPT. We do that by issuing you a new I-20 that shows that we recommend you for OPT, but then you take that I-20 along with other application materials and you submit your application for OPT to the US government. And the US government authorizes your OPT, and there is a fee to apply. Right now, it's $410 to apply. Those fees change, so at this moment, that's the cost to apply. Now, the good thing about OPT is when you apply for OPT authorization, you do not have to have a job offer to apply. You'll remember when I said for CPT, it's authorized for a specific training, a specific employer at specific dates. OPT is not like that. For OPT, you are requesting authorization to be eligible to work in the US. So students apply well in advance before they even have a job offer, knowing that they want authorization at a certain amount of time. And one common misconception that many students have about OPT is that it's an entirely different visa or a different status in the United States. It is still F1 status. So while you are on OPT, you are still an F1 visa holder and you are still in F1 student status while you are on OPT. Okay, we can move, Jacob. So other rules for OPT, to be eligible to apply, you must be maintaining lawful F1 status. And one thing that the school is very concerned about, and that my office at any school, the International Student Office, is making sure students maintain their status. So I'm going to say this for all ISSS offices in the United States, that it is very important that students read their emails from the ISSS offices, because that's the main way we communicate, and everything we're telling you will help you maintain this lawful status. So knowing what you need when you travel, knowing what you need to have to be eligible with your GPA, knowing what classes you need to enroll in, knowing how many credits you need to enroll in. All of these things will impact your eligibility for OPT. So to be eligible, you have to be lawfully enrolled full-time for 1 academic year. That's usually 2 semesters or 3 quarters if the system is a 3-quarter school. At other schools in the US, it's 2 semesters. So there is a waiting period before you can apply for OPT, and a waiting period before you can apply for CPT. You have to be in good academic standing to apply for OPT. And that means a grade point average or GPA of 2.0 above for undergraduates, and 3.0 or above for graduate students. So in terms of when you can apply for OPT, post-completion OPT, that language, post-completion, simply means after you complete the degree. So most commonly it's after graduation is when you're able to apply for this. The US government will accept applications for OPT up to 90 days, so 3 months before you complete your program. So when you're a student and you know you're going to graduate, let's say in May of whatever year you're going to graduate, starting in February, you can apply for the OPT authorization to begin after your graduation date in May. There's a timeline I'll show you really quickly in a minute, but the timeline is kind of complicated, so that's something that right now you don't need to be thinking about, but just know that you have some time to apply for OPT before the authorization will begin. And so for pre-completion OPT, which is less common, you can apply up to 90 days before the intended work start date. So the most common time I've seen that is if you want to do a summer paid job in your field of study, and you already have a job offer to do that, you could apply for that 3 months in advance. But most students who find something during their program of study will use CPT authorization instead. So here is just a very brief view of the post-completion OPT timeline. I'm not going to get into this in too much detail because this is, we at DU, and when I was an advisor at my prior institution, we would spend an hour talking about OPT. So there are hour-long workshops that most universities offer to take you from the start to the finish of what OPT is and what you need to do to apply. But this is just an idea of sort of the timeline. You can apply up to 90 days before you graduate or up to 60 days after you graduate. And then your OPT must start within 60 days of your graduation date. So we can move on from that. Okay, so it's important for you to also think about what can you do while you're on OPT. So again, it's a position, a job, an internship, a consultancy that's in your field of study as listed on your I-20 immigration document. On post-completion OPT, you must work more than 20 hours a week because it's considered a full-time work authorization. But you can work for multiple employers to meet that requirement. You can also start and stop positions. So if you have different positions that happen over time where you start and stop them, like this is common with musicians or artists who have more gig work, as it's called. You can also work in either paid or unpaid volunteer positions, as long as it's in your field of study. And like I said, you can work for multiple employers as well. So I talked about this prior, but if you use 12 months of full-time CPT, you are not eligible to apply for OPT. So that's why I said that most students tend to do part-time CPT, so 20 hours a week or less when they're a student, and they really save the full-time work authorization for after graduation. And then once you graduate, once you complete your program, you are not eligible for CPT or on-campus work. That's because CPT is curricular. It's curricular practical training. It's tied to the current curriculum that you are pursuing at the time. If you've graduated, all that's left for you in terms of work options is the optional practical training to get you that experience. And then F1 students are allowed to work on campus in like the campus bookstore or as research assistants or teaching assistants, things that are related to the operations of the university while you are a student. But once you graduate, you are no longer eligible for on-campus work. You would need to use your OPT authorization if the job is in your field of study. And then you technically could work on campus. But for most students, their on-campus job is not in their field of study. So it's rare that a student will use OPT to work on campus after graduation. So I'll talk a little bit about what's called the STEM OPT extension, which we've mentioned already in this presentation. STEM is science, technology, engineering, and math. And it's a 2-year extension of your after graduation OPT. So you get 1 year of OPT as long as you apply for it and are eligible and you apply and receive it. And then students who are in these STEM fields can apply for an additional 2 years. So some examples of STEM eligible degrees that we have at DU that are very popular. For bachelor's students, I see lots of students that are in engineering and mathematics specifically that apply for the STEM extension. Computer science is another one. Colorado has some very good areas for engineering, some good industry here for that. So I see students working for places in Colorado, companies here that have jobs for them in those fields. Some common master's degrees that I see here at DU that apply for the STEM extension are information and communications technology, data science or data analytics, and then electrical and computer engineering. DU does have a lot of STEM fields, so we do have a lot of students who apply for that STEM extension. And just the last thing about that STEM extension that I want you to be aware of is there is a little bit more of a process involved with the employer. The employer has to assist you with filling out a specific training plan. That's because the US government allows for this STEM extension because of the expertise that is needed in these areas in the United States. But they also need to understand that this is still part of your F1 student status and that you are still being trained in your field. So they have a training plan document that you must fill out and submit to the school. And so there's a bit of a monitoring process where you do some check-ins with the school every 6 months. And it's not cumbersome, it's not difficult, but it does require that you do communicate with the employer about the STEM extension requirements and how the school is part of that.
Terrific, thanks so much.
Yeah, I think that was the end of the formal slides on the rules and eligibility, and I know it's a lot, and there's a lot more detail, but we didn't want to get too into the nitty-gritty. Yeah,
so I also apologize that I wasn't doing the best job of following you and clicking back and forth on slides. So
that's okay.
That's one of the fun parts of technology when we're all in different places. So I'd love to open it up to questions then at this point from the audience. And we do have a few, some that I wanted to answer here. It'd be great if your questions were related to OPT and CPT. If we have time at the end and there are questions unrelated to CPT, we're happy to take them, although Yasmin did point out that there are other sessions coming up on different topics. So many ways for you to get your questions answered. There's a question in the chat early on that I wasn't entirely sure of, so I wanted to punt it to you, Katie. The question was, if a student was on a Fulbright, so they were Fulbright applicants, could they do OPT, add that on to their study objective or not?
So that's a great question. So typically Fulbright students are sponsored by a program within the US Department of State. And so you're actually most likely going to be on a different student visa. It's called the J1 Exchange Visitor Visa. And so OPT and CPT are specific to the F1 student visa. But the good thing is, for a J1 student visa, you do have a work authorization called academic training. And academic training is similar in a lot of ways to CPT and OPT. It can be done prior to your degree completion or after your degree completion. It just has some slightly different rules and criteria for eligibility. So I would encourage you, to look that up. It's called academic training for J1 students. And whatever organization will be bringing you to the US for the Fulbright, would be able to answer those questions specifically, because it will depend on who is issuing your immigration document, which for a J1 is called a DS 2019.
Isn't immigration stuff fun? Yeah. Visas and numbers.
Yeah,
but we do our best to try to make it, to support you in this process. So you see that we all have, every university will have staff like me and Katie who are here to talk to you about this, because we realize it can be complicated.
Oh, and I see the follow-up. Academic training for J1 equals to an internship. Yes, with some caveats. So a lot of times it is an internship, but sometimes it can be like a paid consultancy or something like that. But it really will depend on the school as well about how those are authorized. I can tell you that in my experience, I typically authorized academic trainings for internships while a student was in school, but it really will depend. Yeah. Okay, Jacob, if you want to field some more here.
Yeah, I had a question being back up at the top that I wanted to find. So another question that someone asked specifically, could someone apply for CPT and or OPT as far as medicine is concerned? So if they were in the US doing some kind of medical degree, would they still be potentially eligible for this?
So yes, it will depend again on what exactly that the major code on your I-20 is. So CPT and OPT is available for all F1 students, so it doesn't matter what your major is. But in terms of if it's part of the STEM extension, science, technology, engineering, and math, the medicine part is really going to depend on where it falls, if that particular major falls underneath. And you know, my experience, because of the institutions I've been at, do not have medical schools. I actually can't speak from experience of which particular medical fields are underneath that STEM extension. So that would be a great question to ask a potential school you're looking at that's a medical school.
Great. Medicine in the United States is complicated, and I'm sure you have lots of resources with Education USA to talk you through that process. So if you're looking at the United States for medicine, your best bet is probably to be coming here as a post, like you have a bachelor's of medicine from Egypt, and then you're coming to the US for a post bachelor's degree program. In the US, we don't really give bachelors of medicine. We only have those, you do undergrad and go on to something else. So there's a lot of details that are specific to medicine often. So just be aware of that as you're maybe planning for things of this sort. Someone did ask, like, can I apply for OPT to have a master's and work at the same time, or do they have to wait for 1 year? So I know you talked a little bit about that already, but maybe if you want to re-talk about what the differences between CPT and pre-graduation OPT.
Yeah, and I think if I'm reading the question, can I apply for OPT to have master and work at the same time, or do I have to wait 1 year? So I think if I'm understanding the question correctly, is can you have OPT? Well, I think so. I'm going to maybe explain a couple different things, and hopefully this will answer your question. So OPT is normally used after graduation. It can be used before graduation, but I would usually encourage students to try to pursue CPT before graduation. So that might answer one part of your question. The other part might be, can I have OPT after graduation and then start a new degree program and keep my OPT? And the answer to that is no, because you are granted OPT based on the degree that you just completed. So let's say you're a bachelor's student in biology, and you are on OPT, you've graduated, you're on OPT, you've done let's say you're on 3 months of OPT, it's the summer, you're going to enter a master's degree in the fall in chemistry or something. But you want to keep your work authorization, you want to keep OPT. You actually can't do that if you move from a bachelor's degree to a different degree, like a master's degree. If you move to any new degree program in any way, if you enroll in a new program, your OPT goes away because it was tied to the biology degree, the first degree. But you would be eligible for CPT again. So I don't know if that answered the exact question, but there are little small things like that about CPT and OPT and how they overlap that is a little complicated. And so that's again what our advisors are here, to do.
Great. Thank you for answering that. We're getting a lot more questions now, and so let's see if I can select one that I think works well for what we're doing here. Though I apologize, I'm not sure. I had an internet connection issue, so I'm not sure if you did answer this in your last question, but would a paid teaching assistant position during a master's degree be considered as CPT, or is that something else entirely?
Yeah, so if you are awarded a paid teaching assistantship position, like while you're pursuing a master's or a PhD, that's typically going to fall under the role of on-campus employment. which is not CPT. Because so F1 students, aside from CPT and OPT, have another work authorization option, which is on-campus employment. And you can work on campus for 20 hours a week while school is in session. So during the academic year, usually summer is not considered school being in session. That's usually the break. But some students do both on-campus employment and CPT, and you can do them at the same time. So the most common scenario for that is, let's say you have an on-campus teaching assistant position that you're doing for 20 hours a week, but then you get maybe like a 10-hour-a-week part-time internship off campus. You would need CPT authorization for that.
Yeah. Another question someone had are, what are the chances of being accepted for OPT?
For OPT, if we're talking about just the standard post-completion 12 months that's eligible for all students, it's extremely high that you are awarded that authorization. It's very rare that I see denials for the standard post-completion OPT. And the reason I do see denials is actually mistakes in the application, not because the student is not eligible, but because maybe the student didn't follow the directions properly. So it's as long as you're eligible for OPT and you provide all of the correct documents, and the school, has issued you and recommended you for that given you the I-20, it's very common that students do get the authorization for OPT.
Terrific. So another question that someone had here, they are interested in applying for the STEM OPT after their PhD. So will they be able to apply for a postdoc during the 3 years? Like, is a postdoc going to be one of their OPT options? Or do they have other, CPT options as well? So I guess I'm going to rephrase their question. So the first question is, would a postdoc type position at another university be something they could do on OPT?
Yes, that is the first. That answer is yes. A postdoc would be considered something that you can do at another university while on OPT.
And they would get the 1 year first authorization and then could apply for the 2-year extension if
That's
it's
right.
STEM related.
If it's STEM related. So I will say the PhD and OPT can be a slightly complicated because of when you are finishing your dissertation, so I'm only going to mention that now as sort of a warning to just work with your school on that, because you could be using pre-completion OPT or post-completion OPT. It's a little more flexible for a PhD student. And then if you want to do a postdoc, it would depend on if the postdoc is done after completion of dissertation or not. So schools might have slightly different policies on if they're going to recommend you for either pre-completion OPT or post-completion OPT. And I think in the question I see that there's can I apply for CPT during summer periods? You can if you have not completed your degree. CPT is still available for you. But if you've completed your degree, then the only option is OPT.
And to Nellie's question, I guess it would really depend on her specifics, like what she was doing in the summer, it's very specific to her situation, right? Because if she really...
Yeah, and then the way so it's interestingly, CPT and OPT are much more straightforward for bachelor's and master's students, whereas at the PhD level, it's not difficult. It's just you have to take into consideration your timeline for finishing, because it's much different than your bachelor's and master's. So I would say that's a great question to ask the school you're going, to make sure that you understand sort of the timeline for your degree and what you're able to do and what you need to do to complete. Because and also it's going to be very different by type of degree you're earning. So if you're doing a lab work in intense dissertation because it's a science degree, that's going to be very different than like an anthropology PhD. So it just varies very much between doctoral programs.
Yeah. Just to, I guess, well, I don't know if this assures you, but Nellie, I have a friend who just got their OPT authorization for a postdoc that they are doing at another institution. So they just finished their PhD and are now doing a postdoc elsewhere. So it definitely is possible, which is very specific. Another question that we had, do we have any news about any upcoming changes to OPT that the government will apply soon? So
yeah, that's a great question. We do not have any news, meaning it could come out in 1 minute, and that would be the newest that we would know. There are organizations in the United States that support international education in general and do a lot of advocacy work for international students. And there is right now, the business community in the US is very pro OPT because of the great source of workers that it gives for the United States and the expertise that it brings. You know, it brings college educated, highly skilled bilingual workers. I mean, it's a very popular program among the business constituency in the US. So there has been a lot of advocacy for OPT. So the rumors that we've all heard, while they're disconcerting, we don't have, you know, any specifics on what could potentially change due to the impact that of COVID-19 is really why the conversation has started anyway on that. So I wish I knew more as well, but unfortunately I don't have a crystal ball for that.
I would just reiterate that it's currently anything you are hearing about changes to OPT are rumors and speculations and intention, but they're not planned hard changes yet. And as Katie pointed out, the business community, the businesses in the US really support OPT. There is also both Republican and Democratic support for OPT. So it was really started under George Bush, who was Republican. It was continued under Obama. So right now there's just, is it or is it not going to get, there's broad support for it.
Yes. And also one point of a reminder as well is that when things like that are announced, there are rules and laws about how something like OPT can be changed. So if something comes out that is actually what we would say is extrajudicial, meaning might be outside of the capacity for the executive branch in the United States to change, there are lawyers who will challenge those orders, because just like many of you saw several years ago when the first travel ban was issued, it was quickly stopped because of having some legal issues.
Thanks so much.
Mm-hmm.
Another question that'd be great for us to address: if you apply for OPT before securing a job and you end up not getting a work opportunity, can you renew the OPT authorization? What's details for that?
Yeah, great question. I didn't put this detail in because I wasn't sure. You know, for many of you, OPT is going to be 5 years away, so I didn't want to get too much into this detail, but it's a great question and it's an important part of OPT. So when you are authorized for the 12 months of OPT after graduation, it's the full-time post-completion OPT, you are only allowed 90 days of unemployment. So 3 months of those 12 months, you do not have to have a job. But if you go over that 3 months, you are actually considered out of F1 status and must either leave the US or transfer and start a new degree or change your status. And that rationale is 9 months out of the 12, you need to be doing what you're authorized to do, which is work in your field of study. So you're not ever renewing your OPT, like you're not renewing OPT each time you get a new job. What happens is you get a card, you get a card that's like the size of, like the size of a credit card. You get a card like this, it has your picture on it, and it has the dates of your OPT authorization on it. And so that card is your eligibility to work in the US. It shows the time frame that you have that. But if you go over 90 days, then that becomes void, becomes null. You can't use it anymore, but you're not reapplying each time you get a new job.
Thanks for that. I do want to make sure that I provide you guys again with our contact information, as we will still answer maybe a few more questions in the time we have. But if you had more questions, or you had academic specific questions, I know there were a few people that asked about scores for admission or scores for scholarships and things of this sort. You're welcome to email me with any kind of those admissions related questions, and I can point you in the right direction if I don't have the answers. Or if you had more questions about OPT, you can always email Katie. So I just want to make sure we see that we have this here as well.
Yeah, I do see a couple general questions that kind of run in the same theme, Jacob, which is kind of about how do you what are the options if I'm looking to work in a certain field. I've seen a couple questions like that. I want to promote that I think every university in the United States has a career office or professional development office or some kind of career services office that's available for all students on campus, and that includes international students. And that's usually the first place that I would tell an international student who's trying to find some kind of experience in their field. I would tell them, go to the career services office at the university, and they will help you. They know your field. They know there are people there that help you find work while you're in school and out of school. It's a big part of universities. And so, because I can't be an expert on all fields, I'm the expert in the immigration regulations and in helping international students navigate all of that. But I'm not the expert in your particular area of study, unless you study what I studied in school, right? So that's why we have those career services offices at universities.
Terrific. Just to reiterate, I guess, what we said up to this point to answer someone else's question, the OPT, for the most part, the normal OPT means work that you were authorized to do after graduation. So there is pre-completion OPT that may be applied in some situations, but for the most part, OPT is after graduation. If you want to work part-time while you are still doing your degree, so you're going to be a master's student working part-time off campus, that's CPT authorization. And that's what CPT and OPT really are. I know you've said this multiple times, Katie, but maybe just reiterating the basic requirements for CPT, like when can you actually start that? Could you start it on the first day you came to campus?
Right. So CPT, so there is an eligibility requirement for CPT, which is, and it's actually the same for CPT and OPT, and then there's one small caveat for CPT that I'll talk about. But the same eligibility rule generally applies for both, is that you have to be maintaining your lawful F1 status. You have to be in good academic standing, which means your GPA has to be 2.0 or above for undergrad, or 3.0 or above for grad at most institutions, because most have that grading scale. And then the final one is the one that's the most confusing, is that you have to have been enrolled, meaning you have to complete a certain number of terms enrolled before you become eligible to be authorized. At semester schools, it's 2 semesters. It's a fall and a spring semester together. You have to be enrolled full-time. It's 3 quarters at a quarter school. So like at DU, it's fall, winter, and spring quarter. So that means whether you're a bachelor's student or you're a master's student, if you are brand new to the United States, and this is your first time you're coming to the US in F1 status, and you have not transferred and been in F1 status, say at a community college or finishing your bachelor's, going to your master's, you have to enroll for those terms first. You have to be full-time for either fall and spring semester, or fall, winter, or spring quarter. So it's 1 academic year. So think of it as like about 9 months before you can be eligible to take part in CPT or apply for OPT. So the only exception to that is if you are a master's student and your program requires immediate training off campus. The best example I have of that is at my prior school at American University, we had a program that was a master's in education, and that required an immediate teaching practicum for all master's students. That is one of the only times that we can authorize CPT immediately, is if it's a degree requirement for all students immediately. So I hope that answers that question.
I think so. We've had a few people kind of ask about that, and I totally get why that's confusing.
Yeah, it's confusing, and it's also more confusing too, because let's say you're a bachelor's student who you just finished your degree, you are transferring to another school to begin your master's degree, you're in the US, you have already been enrolled, then you might be able to do CPT right away if the school has like if the school authorizes it. And again, that's the difference. That's the difference between what does the government regulation say, and then how does the school interpret that, right? I will tell you right now that OPT is very straightforward. CPT is a little more of a gray area. So that means that schools have to set their own policies about when they authorize CPT for students.
Yeah. I think we've actually answered, for the most part, all the questions in the chat that were related to CPT or OPT. Yasmin or Walid, I don't know if you had questions that you wanted us to address. I saw, Yasmin, you raised your hand, but I wasn't sure.
Yasmin says she's muted.
Got it. So I guess I will just a general note about the students who are asking about questions about admission.
Now I'm not muted anymore.
Hi, Yasmin.
Because the internet connection just locked me out, and then when I was in again, I found myself muted. So thank you so much for answering these questions. It was really fruitful and informative to all of us, not just the students, but even as advisors. I got to know some information that was brand new for me. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah,
thank you.
As I said, if anyone has any other questions, please feel free to send us.
We can take this last question from Selma. Yeah.
Yeah, I see that. I see the question is, are students eligible to apply to both? So CPT during the academic year and then OPT after graduation? Yes. So you can do both CPT and OPT, and many students do. And the most most would not do CPT and OPT at the same time, because that would mean they're still enrolled, taking classes full time. So the most common thing I see is a student will take, will do a part-time CPT, for example, for, a couple semesters or a couple quarters for an internship, 1 or 2 internships that they have while they're in their degree program. And then they do OPT for 12 months after, and they might continue at that same organization that they did CPT in because they have those contacts, or they might find an entirely different company to work for. Yeah.
Great. And to M's question, just to reiterate that CPT and OPT are available for PhD students as well as master's and bachelor students. So anyone on F1 status and an F1 visa could, could do OPT and CPT.
Yep, like I was saying, those levels, it's really the degree level. One thing I will mention that comes up every so often are students who want to do like 2 master's degrees, for example. That is more common than you would think. And those students don't get 2 OPTs. They only get 1 OPT for that master's level. So that's a common misunderstanding because it's about the level of degree, not that it's a degree in accounting versus a degree in finance. It's that it's a master's degree.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
I mean, I knew that, but I didn't think about that.
Yeah, it's because the common language that you use is, oh, it's per degree, right? Well, it is, but it's degree level, really. It's that you have to be, it's that I always do it like a ladder. It's like a ladder. Associates, bachelor's, master's, doctoral. If you move up the ladder, you don't get to go back down and get the OPT that you didn't use. So you can't save the OPT from like your bachelor's degree and put it on the end of like a future degree, for example.
Makes sense. Yeah, I think Eslam's question, I thought we were wrapping up and then there's more questions, which is great. Eslam had asked, if you graduate in 2016, are you eligible to apply for OPT? To Yasmin's point, you have to have studied in the United States and graduated in order to apply for OPT. So you study in the US and then apply for work authorization. This is a work authorization that's related to your study. But I don't know if Eslam meant this, but it's a question that occurred to me because of it. If you graduated in 2016 and left the US, could you apply for OPT now if you never used it?
No, you cannot. So that's a great question because that does come up sometimes. A student will say, oh, well, you know, I got a bachelor's degree in 2016 in the US from, you know, let's just say from DU. I got a bachelor's degree from DU in 2016. I left, I didn't use it. Now I'm going to come back. Can I use it now? I want to come here as a tourist, and can I just say I want my OPT now? No, you cannot. So it's the F1 visa regulations are very clear on the window for applying. You can only apply for OPT while you are in valid F1 status here in the United States. And during that specific timeline, I shared the timeline very briefly earlier, but you can apply up to 90 days before you graduate and up to 60 days after you graduate. So it has to be during that time that you are completing or almost, or just completed the degree.
Okay, thank you
so
much.
Yeah.
And thank you for your efforts and time today. And we hope to see you in future webinars in different topics. That was really interesting. Thank you so much, Katie and Jacob.
Welcome.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a great day, everybody.
You
Good
too.
day. Have a good evening.